welcome everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. So many of you, whether from near or far, I know some of you traveled, and I just really appreciate you all creating this, giving life to this experience, this profession. I've had so many great conversations with all of you, and I'm sure more to come. It's much appreciated, and I appreciate your attention and being part of this conversation, not just in this room, but the conversation that will take beyond into our lives. So I find it ironic that we're so good at integrating people, yet we struggle to integrate as a profession. We have disintegration from within. There's long-standing rivalries between schools. There's also more current divides around which body tissue or system is our favorite. And we're also disintegrated from the outside world to some extent. You just ask anyone on the street what a structural integrator does. The few might say it has something to do with engineering, and you might get 1 out of 100 that says they heard it's a form of painful massage. But it's so wonderful that we're all here, and we're integrating here, and I'm so inspired by this experience, and my utmost appreciation to all of you and to everyone at IASI who's helped arrange this, and SBI, so thank you. Of course, but life is more than just the high points, right? So we're going to take this back out into a world where the vast majority of our profession doesn't seem to really support our institutions that are designed to help us integrate with the outside world. And so, there's several thousand, couple thousand, I don't know how many SIers are in the world, but only a few hundred are IASI members or have taken the exam for the BCSI credential, or I've even met some people who have the credential but don't display it. So
one wrong move to the thumb.
I know, I'm not used to this. This is, but we'll get through it either way. And so, we've had these historical tensions, and we've managed to make it this far. And I believe we can take that momentum and we can take it even further. We had this heyday in the 70s, and that time will come back around, and we have to be here for that. And it can be tempting to think that things will go on as they have, but things do change, and things could go that way of coming back around. It's also possible for things to not go that way. I serve as editor for the IASI yearbook, and I'm on the board for the certification board for structural integration, and I see these organizations struggling for membership and volunteers. And many practitioners that I meet seem to think that they're these organizations are these bureaucratic monoliths, all right, disconnected from the concerns of the average practitioner. But I see a handful of brilliant and talented and extremely generous and hardworking colleagues that make sacrifices to volunteer their time and their effort, and to not much support from the community as a whole. But then I hear a lot of complaints about what miracles they haven't managed to yet achieve. And I really want us to appreciate that we're a somatic profession with a professional organization and a legitimate board certification, the only one of its kind of which I'm aware. Lots of money and countless volunteer hours have gone into building these institutions, which are designed to help us integrate with the outside world. And if we don't support these organizations, that could all go to waste. But I believe there's hope. So here's a quote from Dr. Martin Zwick at Portland State University, who helped me with he actually supervised the thesis that I'll be sharing with you today. Disorder may be the surface manifestation of a deep and simple order, one that depends sensitively on present context or past state. So human beings are systems and professions are systems. And if any profession should know about systems and structure and function, it's us. And so the same principles by which we help people find more resilience through better integrated structures we can apply those same principles to help our profession find internal coherence and connection with the outside world. So a system is comprised in the most fundamental sense of an organizing principle and boundaries. And it sits at the nexus between structure and function. So considering professions as a system, professional organizations should facilitate our integration with the social and legal realms. For our profession, IASI and CVSI are those organizations, but it seems most of our major schools still don't fully support them. I hope to see some change in that here after this. But, so what we're doing is kind of denying ourselves this organizing principle that can allow us to function coherently in society and protect us from the vulnerabilities of change. So here's another quote from Dr. Zwick. Every system must in some degree or manner be closed, but the degree to which and the manner by which a system is closed, it is vulnerable to a dual risk. It tends to either disintegrate or rigidify. Thus every system must be partially closed and partially open. As it stands, our profession isn't so much a system, but a mere aggregate of schools. And these schools are closed and vertically integrated systems unto themselves. But society and technology and the global economy are in what seems to be the early stages of a long-term trend towards openness and away from proprietary secrets and competition. So we're going towards openness and lateral scaling and collaboration. So our profession is currently organized as out of step with these trends. And while our schools have certainly seemed to be playing nicer over the years recently, we're still ill-prepared to adapt to these changes. And so that leaves us with a choice: to either remain closed and risk disintegrating or rigidifying, or to open ourselves to each other and to the world and the possibility of thriving and seeing our work more profoundly influence a culture that needs what we offer. So instead of continuing to compete in a scarcity-based competitive model, we have an opportunity here to collectively define ourselves in such a way that stabilizes our profession and allows us to interact with the outside world and from a place of security, leveraging the resources of our past to meet the challenges of the present. And that's what this presentation is about. It's based on a thesis that I did as an undergraduate at Portland State, which attempts to explain this idea of integration, the apparent goal of our work in science-based physiological terms. And it uses a visual diagram that reveals that integration isn't so much a goal or a state, but an emergent adaptive process that is complex and dynamic. So I'll start by giving you some background on that project, and then we'll talk about the project itself, and then how we might use it, or rather the system's principles upon which it's based, to help overcome some of the issues I described. So we'll start with some background here. That's the Portland State University campus, where I graduated in 2016. My major was liberal studies, which may sound generic, but it's how I got away with designing a somatic science degree. So I did the same year-long A&P, anatomy and physiology sequences, any health science major, a lot of psychology, any relevant philosophy and such. And at the end of my third year, I took a class in the psychology department that changed my path. So one of the papers we read was, it described some problems in the psychology profession that might sound familiar. Psychologists had formed separate schools and camps, each with its own vocabulary, theoretical orientation, methods, findings, and adherence. And so the authors sought to help unite the profession by organizing around a common vocabulary, core principles, and a general explanatory theory based on physiology. So psychology has been moving in this direction. So whereas before you had these endless debates. Couldn't resist. So we had these endless debates about learning or memory or cognition, or whether behaviorism is better than humanism. So now we're starting to see a shift. And a shift where all these different camps are consolidating. They're understanding that everything's facilitated by these same basic physiological processes. In this case, it's a model known as connectionism, which is the idea of neural nodes connecting to each other in a complex network. And so really what I'm more concerned with is the systems ideas that they're using to get to this. So this not only helps them organize internally to find coherence, but it's helping them integrate with the outside world, particularly with biology. Now they can share resources and ideas with each other, and this helps psychology advance, but it also helps them stabilize while remaining distinct as a field. So I mentioned systems science, and what is that? From the Portland State University Systems Science Department homepage, they define systems science as the study of general principles governing systems of widely differing types and the use of systems, ideas, and methods in interdisciplinary research and in socio-technical system design and management. So it draws on the natural and social sciences, math, computer science, and engineering to address complex problems in the public and private sectors. So I was thoroughly intrigued by this, and I started my 4th year by taking some classes in the systems science department. And one of those classes was systems philosophy with Dr. Martin Zwick, who we already quoted. Dr. Zwick has a background in biophysics, and he's been with the Portland State Systems Science Department since literally before I was born. And in my first paper for that systems philosophy class, I mentioned Ida Rolf. And Dr. Zwick in red ink scribbled, Ida Rolf, I hadn't heard that name in forever. So I showed up to his office hours to pay him a visit and follow up on that. I found that the Dr. Zwick had been Rolfed in the 70s or 80s. He'd also been he'd done Dalton Christ and Alexander, Tai Chi. And this was exciting for me because in all those years, not a single one of my professors had any idea of any of this. So this was also important for me because I was doing this thing called the University Honors College, and that's why I did a thesis and presented that. You had to take these interdisciplinary seminars and such. So I needed an advisor, a faculty advisor for my thesis. And so I knew after this that Dr. Zwick was the chosen one. So I went and I asked him, and the first time he turned me down. He said he was already committed. He was advising grad students. He had his own research. And advising undergrads from outside of his department doesn't benefit his department in any way. In fact, it takes significant time from his primary responsibilities. And he was even considering retirement or sabbatical, so he really had no reason to take on this extracurricular activity. So I was in front of Dr. Wolf, who was my honors college advisor, and I'm licking my wounds from the rejection. And he says, you have to get this guy to be your advisor. And he's like, wait, you're in his class right now, aren't you? Yeah. You have to show up to every class. You have to get an A. You have to go to his office hours every week and get everything you can from him for this project. Ask all the questions, get him involved, court him, in his words, and then ask him to be your advisor. So this is where I went about that plan. And that's the system science headquarters at Portland State. It says, during one of our conversations, Alfred Korzybski came up in a course of general semantics, became a major influence on Ida Rolf. And Dr. Zwick said, what does Korzybski have to do with any of this? And I explained the connection. I followed up with some articles from the yearbook that elaborated on that. And he was impressed and intrigued because early in his career, it turned out he had an interest in Korzybski. So on my next visit, I popped the question again, and he said yes. And this was the product of that. This is our baby. It's titled Integration of Movement / Posture, a Dynamic Adaptive Process Model. You can find it on Google Scholar if you're interested, but I've made some changes over the past couple of years and that you'll see here. And I had to present it to a group of academics who had no background in any of this, and so at the end their questions were like, so what is Ralphing again? Yeah. I've heard that before. So there's Dr. Zwick and I after the presentation. And I also want to be clear that this was not the product of just us two alone. It was also the product of conversations with colleagues, many of whom are with us here today and who I'd like to recognize. We have Anita Bozer here, Ben Hanawalt. We have Bruce Schoenfeld here, and Liz Silverman-Stewart is here. And then in Edmonton, we have Cheryl DeCicero, and Bridge Morgan in Denver, and Sam Sykes in England. So a heartfelt thanks to all of you for your support. Yeah, let's give them a round of applause. You helped us along, and you made it fun. I really appreciate that. So turning to the content of that thesis. So this is the retitled version. And now I call it an emergent adaptive process. I think it's a little more descriptive and less redundant. So it attempts to define integration in physiological science-based language using a visual diagram to help account for the complexity of that idea. Because that's often where these conversations seem to go off the rails. We start over-focusing on one aspect, or we get accused of doing that, so it's hard to keep the big picture in mind. So as we go, I'll work in concepts from systems science rather from the systems philosophy class that'll be useful for understanding. So first, I'm just going to introduce some terms, and some of you may be more or less familiar with these, so I'm just going to very briefly introduce them. Now, whenever we refer to structure or integration, we're assuming that these are things. We're making ontological statements, and ontology asks what is. It's about the nature of being. And that's actually, ontology is a subfield of metaphysics, which is basically what people usually dismiss philosophy as being pointless and self-gratifying. Now, the branch of epistemology is based on what we can know and how we know it, and science can be considered as a system of epistemology concerned with what we can reliably know about the natural world. So the question is that we don't need science to do our work, right? So why bother with any of this? So we are mostly dealing with clients' subjective felt sense. But humans are complex biological events occurring in the natural world. And so SI practice straddles the line between these two. And when choosing which language to emphasize, we have to consider our goals. So if we want to help stabilize a client's body, then we're going to use this individual subjective phenomenological language to help them find their most reliable support. If we want to stabilize our profession in the world, then we need to lean on our most reliable, best supported information. And that, of course, is what science is about. So while speculation has its place in visioning and in determining hypotheses, if we want to stabilize our profession, then we have to lead with our most reliable information. Sally Rolfe agreed. I bid you to examine your own ways of thinking and looking. What you clearly do know, as long as you can measure it, is on solid ground. The ground becomes less solid in the area of complex relationships. And when you get to the area of intuition, your feet are off the ground. Your security lies in your ability to look at these levels of abstraction and thread them apart. It'll give you a great deal more security in your intellectual and emotional life. You can do this and not simply say, I feel. So what we, this SI profession, need is to ground our profession, moving from vague abstractions about structure and integration to an exact and scientific metaphysics. This is a term coined by the philosopher Mario Bunga to describe the systems field. So science isn't so well suited for questions like the nature of structure and the nature of integration, but it can and should inform those questions, grounding them in our current understandings of the natural world and making our ontology more practical and reliable and socially relevant. So for us, the ontological assumptions of our past are not enough, and nor is science. So we have to marry them when considering and presenting our work professionally. And that's exactly what the systems field is about. An exact and scientific metaphysics is the goal of the systems project and why it's especially relevant for our field. So the methods in doing this thesis project. First, define terms and articulate theory from within the SI canon. So I'm pulling from us to base this model. I'm applying science to our ideas that have already been developed through the decades. I'm not really making any of this up. I'm just kind of building off of others. Then synthesize those ideas into an inclusive model, then evaluate the model in terms of scientific evidence. Ask how much evidence is there for this particular element of the diagram, and how strong is it? So we'll start by defining structure. In my paper, I start with this, and I look at how our colleagues have done this, and Hans Fleury was the one that I found that had the most thorough attempt. He had a broad definition and a narrow definition. Broad definition, a mental construct accounting for the spatial interrelationship of the body's parts in context of the mechanical forces imposed by gravity, soft tissue, and neuromuscular tension. He called it functional element. So that's a lot to chew on. That paper is very dense, but there's a lot of value in it. The citations down at the bottom. And so this alludes to the nervous system, but it's more component-based. And that's kind of clarified by the narrow definition, the soft tissue body which gravity acts upon. So the thing about Fleury is that his model was completely, it was more philosophical. He's just playing with ideas, but he didn't look at science at all, and I don't know how much science was available at the time that would have been useful to him. So we're going to look at that. We're going to reinterpret this in some ways. Now, Kevin Frank and Ray McCall did an excellent paper in 2016. It came out just after my thesis, and you can find it in the Rolf Journal. They made me rethink the diagram, and some of the changes I made were based on this paper. So they argue that mechanistic views of structure are too simplistic and out of date with our current understandings of the body as a complex biological system. And so therefore we need to look at definitions of structure from the field of systems biology that have stood the test of time. And so the first definition of structure is by the founder of general systems theory in the 1930s. Its structures are slow patterns of long duration and functions are quick processes of short duration. The next one is from the founder of cybernetics, the science of self-governing systems. We are not stuff that abides, but patterns that perpetuate themselves. I think the dude would beg to differ. Now, both these views are consistent with Rolf, who said structure is behavior, as Russell quoted earlier. Based on these definitions, Frank and McCall offer their own, how the system predictably behaves as a response to specific conditions. So that could be inclusive of the soft tissue, but not limited to that. So, of course, Frank and many structural integrators have been influenced by Hubert Godard, the French movement teacher, and he considered 4 types of structure: physical, coordinative, perceptive, and meaning structure. Note that the latter 3 are all mediated through the nervous system. So, this is, I didn't attempt to offer a concise definition of structure, because that's really not what the diagram was about. But the main thing here is that we recognize that structure is both physical and neural. And so, looking at integration now, I really like this. This came from the New York Times. They did a special where they're talking about Steph Curry. Actually, they're interviewing ballet dancers about how he moves, and they're just gushing about how beautiful his movement is. And they have videos that support that. And so it's really worth looking up, maybe sharing with clients, but I just always like that. So Hans Fleury offered a definition of integration. It says a system becomes whole when order, I summarize it, a system becomes whole when order predominates in that system. And as the human body organizes around a vertical line in relation to gravity, then that axis may be considered an organizing principle for the structural body. So getting into systems ideas there, kind of vague, a little wordy, sounds components based. It does imply interoception, though. I think of the line as an interoceptive concept. Ray Bishop, in 2002 in the Rolf Journal, he described integration as an emerging felt sense of order. And he felt it was important for clients to be able to articulate in their own language a sense of internal coherence that he termed embodiment. So Frank and McCall refer to Dan Siegel, the psychiatrist and neuroscience author. He says he defines integration as the linkage of integrated components of a system. It's viewed as the core mechanism in the cultivation of well-being. These integrated linkages enable more intricate functions to emerge. So he also talks about, some of you may have seen this, the phases of an integrated brain. So integration being flexible, adaptive, coherent, energized, and stable. Some of this could apply to our brain, as he's talking about. It could also apply to our physical experience. So Hans Fleury did this diagram. I won't go too much into it. Just understand this was a major influence on the diagram. There's gravity here, tonus pattern, functional element, the nervous system basically, fascial net structure. He actually expanded that definition to all soft tissues, and culminating into movement / posture. And so a big missing piece here, there's all these physiological processes that are involved, and especially with the nervous system, that gets really complex, and they actually interact with each other. So he did a great job, but I just tried to flesh it out a little more. So there's a science-based attempt to explain integration. We're just looking at the components here without the words. So the shapes have significance, and the green oval is the end product. It's an emergent quality at the level of the organism, right? And the two diamonds, we won't worry about the colors yet, the two diamonds are adaptive functions that are resulting in this emergent quality. The blue boxes are physiological processes at the organ and tissue levels. And so that's all in this big gray box, the shaded area. That's within the organism, right? That's within us. And then outside of that, we have the two orange boxes, which are environmental impacts, influencing physiological processes, resulting in adaptive functions that have this emergent quality. And that emergent quality then is movement / posture integration, so borrowing from Fleury again. And so you know, I'm actually going to put this PDF of all the slides up on the group. Feel free to take all the pictures you want. I'm trying to video record it also, so I'm trying to, but feel free. Just don't worry if you don't get everything. So we're going to break this down here. Now, just briefly, I'm not going to go into great detail with all this, and I want to put you to sleep, but so this first link is the physical structural adaptation resulting in this quality of integration, right? So you could say this is a quality of adaptability that emerges. So this is where, so how this can be used, sometimes we start throwing around all the ideas, and biotensegrity comes up, and then people start arguing whether that's valid or not. You know, I think you would put anything about biotensegrity research, you kind of file it away here. This is designed as sort of a conceptual filing cabinet to be able to organize research, right? So in the paper for this link, I talk about all these different studies that relate to this. And I didn't try to be thorough or comprehensive by any means. I just took a little stab at it, because the point is just to make this structure, then let other people fill it in. So, you know, like if you're going to talk about tensegrity, great, this is one aspect of that. I had a hard time finding studies that were talking about biotensegrity at the organism level, but that's really what we're talking about here. They were more on the cellular level. We would think that would also apply to the organism, but it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. So then the second link, so this is all feeding that physical structural adaptation, neural structural adaptation, right? Two major aspects to structure here. So this could be neuromuscular contraction or relaxation. The yellow diamond is Fleury's tonus pattern or functional element, right? And this also plays off Cellier's theory of general and local adaptation syndromes. So actually, the diagram actually builds off of this. So I'll say from the paper, according to Cellier's theory of general and local adaptation syndromes, adaptive functions result from physiological processes in response to physical and psychosocial stressors in effort to restore homeostasis within the organism. That's all it is. So then you look at this path, so there's links and there's paths, like groups of links. Okay, I'll just give a very simple example of this. So you get, so you're in a boxing match, right? And you get punched in the face. So the overall, that kind of thing, just seeing that quality of movement, that is where this is happening, right? The physical structure is displaying this quality. Then you go here, you could say this is the neuromuscular contraction that facilitates that quality of movement. Right? But then you look here, this is the fist hitting the face, the bruise. Right? Then you go to the next path. Physical impact influences tissue-specific processes, which also influence unconscious motor processes that influence the neural structural adaptation. So this, you could think of this as, well, here's a good quote. The impact of physical force is not directly sensed. Rather, it registers as changes in length, shape, strain, position, or the lifetime of biomolecular interactions. So this, you can think of this like the vestibular system, right? You have those little stones that get slosh around in the fluid, and they stimulate the nerve, and that impacts the cerebellum. So you get here, and that's what happens, and you feel woozy. This could also apply to the cerebellum plays a big part in this, but it receives input from soft tissues, the visual system, the auditory system, and as we mentioned, vestibular functions. So then going to the next part. So now we're on the other side of the model, right? So this is I'll go back to the whole. Okay, so we just talked about all this here, and now that's the physical impact, and now we're looking at the psychosocial impact. And note, these are happening at the same time. Not trying to categorize things as this is either physical or psychosocial. It's all happening at once. So looking at psychosocial impact. The psychosocial impact influences unconscious, affective, and autonomic processes, which then result in neural structural adaptation. So this could be the autonomic limbic hypothalamus projections to the brainstem stimulates the autonomic nervous system. So you get punched in the face, and your fight or flight goes off, right? You're sympathetic, reacts, your feelings are hurt. So this refines from this previous, so there's this neural structural adaptation, right? This, in the cerebellum, we develop these central pattern generators, they call them, these kind of patterns of orientation. Now this refines that. Okay, so this information is all coming in at the same time. Then we look at psychosocial impact also affecting conscious physiological processes, which result in neural structural adaptation. So this is goal-directed, voluntary processes, all of this, right? So notice in the major diagram, you also have what we just saw there. These are happening at the same time. So so say you're in the boxing match with your mother, and you're having this reaction. You want to strike back, but you have to hold yourself back consciously, right? So this is driven by the cerebral cortex. None of these paths act alone, right? They're all working together. So then finally we're getting to the last two links. This is what it all adds up to. This emergent quality of movement posture integration. We assume that it enhances resilience. So say, I would think, a good example, say your mom's on top of a van, right, like a truck, and you're driving along and she jumps off. Well, what's going to happen? If she's a stunt woman, she'd probably go into a little roll and handle it pretty well, right? She's well integrated. Well, then if she stiffens up, she's not used to jumping off vans, then that might not end so well. So we've always kind of assumed this, right? Or a cat jumping, the cats seem well integrated and they just land on their feet. That's what this is describing. I think we've always kind of talked about this. And then we also talk about psychosocial impact being minimized by a well-integrated person. So what is this? This link suggests that a sense of ease and coherence in one's body enhances somatic resilience to psychosocial stresses such as state anxiety. Some research exists to support this relationship. And the research I saw was around looking at Alexander technique, yoga, Feldenkrais studies, but the evidence was still weak. But it's there. And so this just allows us to kind of look at the research in an organized way at all these different aspects of this great complexity that we're negotiating, and to just maintain some perspective, right? We can see how strong that evidence is if we collect all this and organize it, and know what we can most reliably lead with. So I was asked to come up with an integration definition by Michael Pollan, who will be presenting on similar themes here, because this whole model is, it's very conceptual, and it has helped my practice, actually. We'll talk a little more about that, but Michael talks going to be a little more practical. So integration, a quality of physical adaptive expression in response to biopsychosocial environmental impacts that emerges via a complex interaction of physiological processes. If you're writing a research paper or something, you might want to use that one, but then I try to follow Fleury and give a narrow definition, an emergent quality of adaptive function. A little more simple. Still not plain language, really, but. So when I show this to people at parties or something, and there's like, so what? Pretty picture, but. Well, it can help us address some of our current challenges, I imagine. So there's this external criticism of posture, structure, and biomechanics. There's a big paper by Al Lederman not too long ago. He was talking more about pain, so it's important, I think, to keep that in mind. But sometimes that gets projected as it doesn't matter for anything ever. So I think this would allow us a way to address that in a more responsible and coherent manner. By being clear about what we mean by structural integration, by being very clear on those terms, that can help us distinguish ourselves from massage, right? Which, we look at the 3 paradigms model, we'll talk about that: holistic, palliative, corrective. You can see massage being clearly grounded in palliative. I think we both share some corrective aspects to our practice, but we're distinctly holistic, right? And that's what this diagram, I think, describes, and I think what we've always been about. Lack of supporting science. Now, what Russell was talking about earlier, clinical studies being necessary, and I think that's really, if we want to gain traction socially, that's really what we need, clinical research. But there's this internal disagreement about explanatory models that just keeps going on and on and on. Is fascia more important? Is the nervous system more important? They're both important. Let's just look at all of it and try to make sense of it. And you're going to have a hard time finding supporting science for a lot of these ideas at the organism level. But neuroscience, the idea of neuroplasticity, has a lot behind it, and there's a lot of strength and has a lot of social traction right now. Fascia science is emerging. Let's keep up with that. Let's build that resource. But the important thing, another thing that Russell was talking about earlier, was reaffirming our somatic roots. Getting back to what we're really about, the whole person, right? And I think this looking at structure and integration in this holistic way helps us do that. It also helps us support the IASI mission, which you see on the website. They say to advance, the mission of IASI is to help advance and promote the highest professional standards for SI, to preserve the foundation and support the continued evolution of the art, science, and philosophy of SI, and to represent the interests of SI professionals to the public, regulatory agencies, and other professions. So we'll look at each of these individually. So it advances and promotes our professional standards. I had a paper in the IASI yearbook in 2016 that looked at some research on professions, and there was a lot of good research from the physical therapy community. And they were looking back at sociological research, though, decades of that. And they said that characteristics, like professional organizations, all that, important, but not sufficient to define a profession. They looked at qualities, theory, autonomy, ethics, and accountability. And it looks like in our past, a lot of it's been based on the first 3, but accountability, I think, is a big, the missing piece, really, that we're starting to come around to it, though. In the IASI Blueprint, 2015, they said SI is poised to take its rightful place among healthcare services, and that we aspire to the highest professional standards. So the question posed by the first, what standards then are we accountable to? A profession gains its status from the society in which it serves, right? So that implies, then the blueprint statement implies that we aspire to healthcare standards. Now, there's there's a lot of pushback sometimes, and the idea of SI as healthcare comes up, and we'll look at that briefly. But so the healthcare professions are client-centered, right? So one aspect of that is accountability for our effectiveness and our claims. And so for our effectiveness, that's where clinical research comes in. And for our claims, that's where this model tries to help facilitate. So considering SI as part of, say, allied healthcare, that's where we fit in. I looked at popular definitions of healthcare, because sometimes we think, oh, that means we have to take insurance. I don't want to do that, or I don't want to work in a hospital to do SI, and it'll become too corrective and fix-it-based. Well, that's not what I'm thinking of when I think of this. Merriam-Webster Dictionary, healthcare as efforts to maintain or restore physical, mental, or emotional well-being, especially by trained and licensed professionals. Dictionary.com, the field concerned with the maintenance or restoration of the health of the body or mind. And so reasons our clients generally come to see us: just general well-being, functional improvement or maintenance, rehabilitation, prevention, and relief from pain or discomfort, or desire for personal growth. I think those aspects all fit into these general healthcare definitions. So just assuming then, based on those definitions in the blueprint, that we aspire to some kind of relationship with allied healthcare. Healthcare professions are client-centered, right? So the Institute of Medicine had this impactful paper in 2001. They said define client-centrism as, or patient-centrism in their language, providing care that is respectful of and responsive to individual client preferences, needs, and values, and ensuring that client values guide all clinical decisions. That can sound like we're cool then with clients just bossing us around and telling us what to do, but it's more about just involving our clients. I think most of us do that, involve them in the process, and just engage them throughout, and make sure we're all on the same page about what's going on. And of course, informed consent, which you talked about the other morning. So this applies not just to our clinical experience, but to all aspects of our public presentation, because that contextualizes the client experience. So our website and promo materials on the IASI website, our schools, client-centrism all plays a part. We're all part of this. So the second aspect of the IASI mission is that this supports is it preserves helps preserve our foundation while supporting our evolution. So clearly defining this goal of our work, integration, helps facilitate our differentiation from other professions, as we addressed. A science-based model helps support research. Because then people doing research then could refer to integration and point to, say this paper, other papers that elaborate on this, and they could have something that's not just metaphysical, right? So this allows us also to discuss elements of what we do without losing sight of the whole, right? We can talk about biotensegrity and not and be clear that this, we're just talking about part of this, right? We can still have all other aspects of integration. And it also allows us to explore other things like, say, pain science and whatnot without losing our essence as a somatic profession. And that's how I'm going to use this the most clinically, is, because before when people would come in with aches and pains, I would be very hesitant about going there with them, right? I felt I'm a structural integrator and I have to refer you out to deal with we can maybe see if something happens, or now I feel a lot more comfortable just understanding, because pain fits into that diagram when you look at unconscious, affective, and autonomic processes. So that's where then I go, okay, we can address that part of their integration, and then we can help them, we can address other aspects. I get into more of the somatic education part, and they'll all play off each other. So the third aspect of the IASI mission that this project helps support is it helps us represent ourselves in the public. Now, it was not just the public, the regulatory agencies and other professions as well. So these quotes are from the first 1 to 2 sentences of the About section, the websites of several closely related allied health professions. So first, physical therapy. The APTA's website says physical therapists help patients reduce pain and improve or restore mobility, right? And then you look at the AOTA for occupational therapy. Occupational therapists help people across the lifespan participate in the things they need or want to do through the therapeutic use of everyday activities. And then the American Psychological Association says some psychologists do basic research, others apply the discipline's scientific knowledge to help people, organizations, and communities function better. So note that they go right in. This is again in the first or second sentence of their about, whatever the profession's about page. They go right into needs, their potential clients or patients' needs. They don't mention any physiology, any speculation about physiology. They don't go into their history, their founders, or any of that. Sometimes if you dig deeper on their web pages, you might see some things about that, particularly I looked on APT and AOT, I didn't see anything. APA goes a little bit into that. I guess psychology is kind of differentiating from the Freudian. They're still trying to fight against that somewhat. But they don't really go into any of that. And they also use very plain language that are, again, focused on needs. Now, this is who we're trying to hold a marketplace with, right? Now, look at us. So, from the IASI website's new to structural, what is structural integration about page, structural integration is a type of bodywork that focuses on the connective tissue or fascia of the body. And then fascia, 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 fascia for 2 paragraphs in 1 sentence. And then the beginning of 3rd paragraph, SI works to lengthen, stretch, and soften this tissue to, of course, that's a subject of debate, to restore postural balance, ease of movement, and a feeling of being more at home in your body. So that's when they start to get into client needs, right? But you got to read that far. So now the person that I'm about to show you may or may not have something good to offer, and that's a different conversation. But this is the inventor of the fascia blaster. Ashley Black, Guru. She actually uses Guru. Just in this little section of her webpage, she uses the word fascia 13 times. And you can keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, and it just continues. So we're trying to hold a marketplace with these professions, yet our public presentation looks more like this. These professions are based on integrity, clarity, client needs, right? They're client-centered. So we're more closely resembling a faddish gimmick right now on our public presentation. I meet so many. I haven't talked to anyone this whole weekend that seems to. Everyone has such a sophisticated understanding of our work, and I don't think that our public representation currently displays that. And I'm looking at our school's websites, and it looks like Ashley Black wrote their copy as well. Wow. Not so much. They're all different, but so yeah, allied health professions are client-centered. They don't burden the public with all this physiology. They save it for their internal debates. They absolutely debate all this stuff in the nervous system and stuff. That's a topic of conversation for sure in their communities, but they keep those debates within their community. And also, while I certainly admire and recognize and our founder, Ida Rolfe, the utmost respect and appreciation. We wouldn't be here without her, and those who came after her, of course. You look at the other professions, they appreciate their founders. Like I've looked at occupational therapy books, and they go on about the history of OT and all the different people who helped develop the field, but they don't lead with that. Right? I had a hard time finding anything about that on their web pages. So then, you look at those definitions that are on our school websites and on the IASI site. I wonder, what about the rest of the person, right? Just looking at the model that we were looking at earlier. And also, what about our own principles, right? You look at Paradigms of Healing. This is from Maitland Sultan. I think Salveson was involved with this as well. 1992, great paper. And they talk about 3 paradigms of healing: palliative, corrective, and holistic, of course. So those those definitions that we use on our websites don't seem holistic to me, right? And they seem more about lengthening and doing things to fascia, which seems to me more corrective, right? Which then that muddies the waters. It puts us a little closer to massage, because I think massage is more firmly rooted in palliative. We're more firmly rooted in holistic. And then corrective, the second paradigm you could say is more like PT, OT, the rehab, healthcare professions, chiro maybe. But of course, massage is somewhat corrective. We're a little bit corrective too. Like you can play in all these domains at once, right? But when we use public definitions that emphasize the corrective aspect, then that muddies the waters, right?
Dan, the word holistic has been around for a while and is often used somewhat loosely.
Yes.
Looking at this, I understand palliative, I understand corrective. Could you say more what you mean by holistic?
Well, I'm borrowing language. Thank you, Jeff. I really appreciate that. That actually is a good point, because I have been uncomfortable with holistic for those very reasons. It's become more of a marketing term, it seems, and so it's lost some of this. I was just using, actually, I had another version of this. Underneath, I put my preferred language, or I think is maybe might be more relevant today, is exploratory or educational, perhaps. I'm not quite sure. That would be a good conversation to have. You know, if anyone wants to write a paper for the yearbook about that, I'd be very interested.
The original word that Maitland used was actually transformational.
Transformational.
Referring to transcending the current state of expression in the body.
Thank you. That would be another good. That's important to consider also. Yeah. So see, we have all kinds of ideas and history to build upon, and experience and sophistication. Like, let's all get together and build off of this and get current, right? And get our websites more based around the whole person, the client, and also around our principles, right? Yeah, and this is the diagram. There's more to structure and integration than fascia, right? Or the nervous system, right? And there's more than this, of course. You know, what's the all models are wrong, some are useful. I think that applies here. It's definitely not everything. And there were so many iterations of this thing. I would do up a version, send it to Dr. Zwick. He'd look at it, go, nope, 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 nope. Send it back to me. And that was just, you know, a few nights of no sleep and way too much coffee. And I had to do it all over again, right? There was one version that had nutrition in there. A little too broad for most of our purposes. But yeah, you could include a lot more in this. And this can be developed. This is not the final word. I don't intend it that way at all. It's just taking a stab. And I hope we can all get together and collaborate on that.
On your iterations of this, where is the orangey box for things that arise within us, right? Because we've got the impacts coming into the system from external, but what about the internal?
That's a great question. Yeah, I wonder how to work that in. You might think we might consider that we're always taking in experience, even if when we're still, right? So that, but even if, like, what about dreaming? You can think of that when we're asleep and our senses aren't. I don't know how open our senses are.
Just saying.
I'm not the expert in that realm, so.
Let's talk about puberty.
As an example.
Or even the emotional body in general.
Yeah, anyway.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, that does fight.
Yeah.
So that's you could say that things that arise within us, the most unconscious, affective, and autonomic processes, always happening, right? So if this doesn't have to be like an event, physical and psychosocial impact as an event.
Yeah.
It's just as an ongoing. We're always walking around in space. All of you relating here. So yeah, no, it can be developed for sure.
I'm with that. A little double box.
Yeah.
A double.
Yeah, that one.
Something, a double box, or anyway.
Let's-
I'm really liking your model.
Thank you.
As
Thank
I'm
you.
getting familiar with it, I'm starting to move on.
Let's figure it out and develop it.
Yeah.
Check with Dr. Zuniga.
Love to get him involved with this some more. Love you guys to hear a Zwick lecture sometime. So this is a quote from Samuel Butler. Extremes are alone logical, but they're always absurd. The mean is illogical, but an illogical mean is better than the sheer absurdity of an extreme. So, saying it's all placebo, that's an extreme, right? It's all fascia, that's an extreme. This diagram is not complete, but again, it's a mean. It's an attempt at a mean. And again, looking at our definitions, what about education, right? Here's a quote from Ida Rolf. This is the important concept, that Rolfers are integrating something. We're not restoring something. It takes us out of the domain designated by the word therapy and puts us into the domain designated by the word education. We're less therapists than we are educationists. This is what I mean. This is my goal, an educational process. So again, in those descriptions, IASI, any of the schools, nothing about education. Well, I think maybe there's a couple things in there, but again, this is something that I'd all seem to see is more at the front of what we do. Here's a proposal. I worked hard on my own website to try to come up with my own definition of structural integration that I would put on my own website, but just to try to emulate some qualities of the other professions that we looked at. I'll read it to you. Structural integration is a process-based approach to manual and movement therapy that explores the possibility of change in how you use and experience your body. Through education, awareness, and therapeutic touch, you can release painful, I'm talking to potential clients, you can release painful, stressful patterns of tension, replacing effortful habits with comfort and ease. SI systematically addresses your body as a whole, usually over a series of sessions. Skillful touch brings relief and from pain and discomfort, and awareness to how you're holding and using your body. Together, we engage in an inquiry around how you relate with your body and environment. My role in this process is to help you recognize patterns of tension that no longer serve you, discover new options for movement and posture, explore useful ways of thinking about your physical experience, and apply relevant self-care strategies to support your continued well-being. This adds up to a more adaptable, resilient, authentic, and enjoyable experience of your body and life. This is physical education for the 21st century.
May we officially appropriate some and/or most of that?
Yes, please. Feel free to copy this verbatim. I mean, I basically built off of other people's websites that I looked at. So.
You forgot fascia.
You and Miss something. Maybe I should get Ashley Black as a consultant. The next version.
Does gravity belong in there?
That's a good question. I personally, of course, I'm not trying to speak for everyone here, and everyone has their different aspects that they like to emphasize. When I'm working with people, I consider gravity a constant, and that was a constant in Hans Fleury's model. And so I will refer to gravity when I think it might help a client. I think I'm working with people's relationship with gravity first and foremost. So, right, I want to connect with the client in their relationship of their spatial orientation and including gravity. So I might sometimes use that language to help them to get a sense of their weight. So if people like to emphasize gravity, I mean, I personally, I use it more as a clinical tool.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to focus more on client needs. And so I don't hear people usually saying that they want a better relationship with gravity, even though that might be what they're looking for, right? That's just, one take on that. So then where do we go from here? So there's this great talk, so this is the economist and social theorist Jeremy Rifkin, who had a book a few years ago, The Third Industrial Revolution. I just seen this talk on Vice, on the Vice YouTube channel. You can find this. It's a great talk. He talks about where he's referring to, he thinks that by 2030 we're going to be on this, we're heading towards this Internet of Things platform, right? We're all, we're already pretty much there, where we're all interconnected with each other on this global nervous system, and also devices are being more connected to that, so we're all developing this interconnectedness here. And so that's the platform that he's referring to in this quote, that he imagines will be ubiquitous by 2030. This third industrial revolution platform is designed to be distributed, not centralized. It works best when it's collaborative, open, and transparent, rather than closed and proprietary. And the benefits come when more and more people join the network and each of us contributes our talents, which benefits the network and then benefits us. It's designed to be laterally scaled, not vertically integrated. And he talks about the economy changing towards, to emphasize, to move away from ownership and markets towards access, networks, and social capital. He talks about changing ideas about freedom, power, and community. Going from freedom as exclusive and autonomous to being free through inclusivity and having access to sharing networks. He talks about power going from top down, being vertically integrated, to being laterally scaled. He talks about changes in ideas in community, going from community as competition between sovereigns for scarce resources to cooperation between interdependence for maximum efficiency.
I'm not sure I understand laterally scaled.
Laterally scaled, so I think of the internet being laterally scaled, and so you see all these groups starting to work together. I see it in manual movement therapies. All these little groups are popping up, and they're all interprofessional, and so they're not based on their top-down profession orientation. They're all their professions have vertical integration within them. They have an organizing principle, organizing principles.
Maybe.
Right? Yeah. Right. But people are interacting now in this laterally scaled environment where we're all playing off each other and collaborating. Does that make sense? So Dr. Zwick, closeness is the residue of the past. Openness is contact with the present. The past as legacy and resource cannot be renounced, nor can the challenge of the present be ignored. Rule by the internal past is inertia. Rule by the external past is drift. Either rule is bondage, as is random determination by past or present. What is necessary is to be active, not passive, through either synthesis or balance, but neither is easily achieved. So SI is vulnerable in some ways. We don't own fascia. Anyone can buy a fascia blaster, or there's all kinds of therapies now that claim to work with fascia. So to lead with that, we're vulnerable. We don't own structure or integration either, right? This is open source. Anyone, you could say even massage works with structure integration on some ways. We're vulnerable to exploitation by other professions uninterested in somatics. I think we've had struggles with that legislatively in the recent past. And those professions, well, they have a tension between corporate commoditization and a science-based professionalism, right? I was at the AMTA conference just a couple weeks ago, and Whitney Lowe was talking about how some ideas about fascia that are popular should be questioned, right? And so he was talking about research and encouraging everyone there to start using that. So this is massage, and they're starting to go that way perhaps, and I think we should be aware of that and in tune with social trends. Also, we could look at exploitation by other professions uninterested in somatics. I think it's important that we protect our profession in some way. We don't own structure or integration, right, either. So to protect our practice, that's where the BCSI credential comes in, that exam. That is a legit exam. There is a lot of validity to the process.
Can you clarify what you mean by the third point, the exploitation by professions? Can you give an example?
Yeah, so yeah, that's going to tie in here.
Okay.
Yeah, so like well, anyone could claim to teach structural integration, right?
And
I mean,
we are.
and are, yes, okay, yeah, we're aware of this, right? So I mean, in a nutshell, that's already happening, and that's what it is. So to be able to differentiate ourselves from those practitioners, like in an office I used to be, there was someone down the street who they claimed to practice structural integration. And I looked at their website, and it didn't look like any of them had attended an IASI school or anything even related. Had no credentials, no connection with the community. That was obvious, at least from their site. And their descriptions of the work did not seem to reflect what we do. So on my nameplate on my door, I say board certified structural integrator, because they cannot attain that unless they go through the process and attend one of our schools and take the exam and be a member of our community, right? So that's where what's happening in Nevada now. Robin Graber has put in a lot of work to get SI licensed there. I'm not sure if that process is complete yet.
Yes, and she spent 8 years on that board to be able to be in a position to get that done.
That's incredible.
They accept our exam now.
It's wonderful. Yes, yes. Let's give a round of applause for Robin and everyone. And Deborah Emmons, who is also a part of that.
Deborah's the bomb.
But if I can just say, she just got she is the first licensed structural integrator in the state of Nevada. She just got her license in the mail, and the rules should be finished, they're hoping, finished and implemented and in full force in July.
That is fantastic.
Wow.
Congratulations. Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong, that's not actually an independent licensing board, that's a distinction within a massage license
No,
in that
it is
state.
not. It is an independent license. It is now it's a license in structural integration. The board is massage, structural integration, and reflexology. And
Wonderful.
There is a Rolfer is now the first SI representative to that board. So it is a board that recognizes three distinct professions, three distinct licenses.
That is incredible. Thank you so much, Deborah, for all your work. So how do we adapt? There's a couple of ways we could do that. I mean, we could do, either or both. One, open the system internally, right? To develop a more coherent, client-centered front. Right? And to do that, we already talked about revising how we present to the world, reconciling some of our differences in how we approach things. Some people favor speculation, some people orient skeptically. We have to understand that speculation plays a role, right, to drive visiting, and hypotheses, skepticism helps keep us grounded and consistent and reliable. So we need each other. Okay, we need all aspects. We need all hands on deck for this project. And opening the system internally would mean also actively supporting our own institutions, IASI membership, board certification, and I think we need some urgency behind this. And we're all here doing it. We need to take this energy out into the world and get everyone else on board and come together and unite as a profession. That would help us have an organizing principle, right? So we can have and boundaries, so then we can open externally and interact with the world coherently. Should we not do that and rigidify or disintegrate, what could happen with that? Well, I would hate to see these institutions, IASI and CBSI, fade away. There's so much money and time and effort that's been invested in building these institutions. So, if some people want to stay around and do their thing, that's fine. But those who want to professionalize, perhaps we could we could open that system and say, open the systems of IASI and CBSI and say maybe the International Association of Somatic Practitioners and board certified somatic practitioner. And because there's people from Feldenkrais and yoga who want to engage on a more professional level, and they have these problems within their own professions. So maybe we could all get together and have a big somatic profession, or we could bring them in to call, say structured integration. That's all what we're doing the same thing. We could maybe there's different ways to go about this, but I'm just throwing it out there. I don't want to see this fall apart, and we're all here building the structure that we need professionally. We're integrating, but what do you think we should do? I want to hear from you. How do you see it? What do you want to do? What strategies, what ideas do you have?
I think your idea of a larger somatic profession that includes these many other possibilities that we have would be a great idea.
Why?
Feldenkrais, Peter Levine, Pat Ogden, all these somatic professions are all kind of competing right now for brand. And we're competing for brand too, trying to figure out how to do that and market ourselves. But if we were all part of a larger umbrella of somatic professions, I don't know, it makes more sense to me because it's like laterally, how'd you put it in your talk? It's a lateral expression rather than a vertical expression.
Lateral scaling?
Yeah, scaling.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
et
Thank you.
cetera.
Oh, okay, well, I'm gonna get you next because you had your hand raised earlier and I didn't call on you. What was it, Deborah?
I just want to say, we already have what's called the Federation of Massage, Bodywork, and Somatic Practices, and it is a group of Feldenkrais, Traeger, AMTA, IASI, RISI, and Polarity, Alexander, and Biodynamic Craniosacral, and I think I'm missing somebody else. Asian Bodywork. And we all get together. It is a federation, so there's not an umbrella organization. We are organizations that get together, and we do work together. In fact, whenever we do law and regulation in the state, I'm working with all of them as well, so that we are coordinating and not stepping on each other and supporting each other's organizations. But there is no interest in those groups in losing their autonomy to make their own decisions about their own organizations. But this is how we do work together, and so that is happening. And even if there are organizations that are too small to kind of fit within our framework, when there's something that might interest them, we'll even bring them in and let them know what's going on. So just so you know, that stuff is out there already.
Perhaps that could be, part of, provide some structure, or we could,
Yeah.
unite somehow. We already have, I
We
suppose.
do regularly.
Yeah. Thank you.
Say it again, Federation of.
Massage, bodywork, and somatic practices. Call it Fed MBS, and we have a website, so you can go there and look. It's kind of ordinary, but.
So I want to call on you next.
Yeah, I think it is, yeah, I'll look it up.
This space you're referring to with the somatic, like Feldenkrais rock movement, to my knowledge, is that not filled currently by ISMETA?
And Ismeta is in our group too.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because they recognise rock movement, Feldenkrais,
Right.
at 300 or 500 hours minimum training.
Yeah, you have to have 500 hours, yeah.
Juan David.
A couple things, I think that at a very basic level, and I think that not everyone really grasps this. The bottom line is IASI does not have enough members, right? And they're doing a lot of the work, and they need the money. They need members to sign up. So I think that if we can all recruit some of our colleagues and increase those numbers, we're really increasing the strength of the organization that is, doing all this work for us.
Yes. Yes.
So that's one thing. The other thing is, if you have time to volunteer for any of the committees that work at different things at IASI, do it. The more people that volunteer, the smaller the workload. And you can also choose to volunteer just, if you can only volunteer an hour a week to do a little research for a committee. I'm sure, and I'm not involved with IASI right now, but having involved with organizations like this, I know that even that can make a big difference.
So IASI membership, volunteerism, also volunteerism for the CBSI is important, and taking the board certification exam, and recruiting our colleagues to do that. And I have I saw you and then Libby, so I want to first start.
Just real short, going on the first point, open the system internally. When I saw that, I just feel it needs to grow our movement needs to grow from the inside out, right? Recruiting other people, okay, but how about the practitioners right now that aren't board certified, that aren't members of the IASI? Yeah. So from the inside out, I think we need to grow and be solid, because that'll be a solid core. And then can the system be be opened externally, yes, because it's solid to support anything that's coming from the outside, so it starts here, right, from the inside out.
Starts from the inside out. Thank you, thank you. And I saw you, but also as I wanted to be, had another point. Did you still have it?
Well, yeah, Russell is encouraging me here too. This is something that we shared last night at the meeting, and it's, the Ralph Institute has been working for now a little over 3 years in developing very clear rubrics for assessing students when they graduate, right? Like trying to articulate in the, you know, in a clear way, ideally, what is it that a practitioner needs to graduate? And this is something, we're still working on it. This year we started a beta testing, so we're at least a year away, but this is something that we're gonna publish. And I think that this is important because it helps us all to develop some of the clarity that you were requesting here, right? Like what, you know, when we talk about embodiment, what does that mean? When we talk about all these concepts, right? Developing clarity so that our whole profession can be perceived in a very different way. So
Common standards.
it's coming. And
Thank you, thank you. Libby, this will be our last one.
Nobody has time to volunteer. We do it anyway.
Yes.
We do it anyway because we care about our profession. You can get involved with the project, you can commit a certain period of time. I mean, if you have 4 small children and you know, your husband's out of town all the time, or your wife's out of town all the time, depending on who cares for the kids, it really is difficult, but you really can do small pieces. And the very least you can do is join and encourage your colleagues to join, all of us, because we're going nowhere on the amount of attention, time, and money that we've given IASI. It's pretty much a miracle that it's here at all. If we want what we want for our profession, which is to have a presence, we've got to go there.
Thank you, thank you. And we're about the last one here, Hillary.
One last thing, that whole lateral power that you were talking about, lateral scaling.
Yeah, lateral scaling, yeah.
The Rolf Institute publishing standards for all of the schools to use is one example of that. The schools meeting that was held last night and attended is another example of that. That kind of movement inside our own organization will strengthen us.
Yes. So let's keep the movement going, everyone. Thank you so much for your time and attention and conversation. Thank you.
You better not. You are.
Send me a message.